Hello, everybody. My name is Luis Alvarez, and I am your leader today here at the February Cybersecurity Meetup. Technically, today should be March 1st, but every 4 years, we have February 29th. So we had an extra day. We thought we'd give you a meetup instead of just letting you get on your way. But thank you for being here. As always, I'm joined here with my partners in crime, Jeff Dix, our Chief Security Officer here at Alvarez Technology Group, and Anil Malwani, our Service Manager and also our Senior Cybersecurity Analyst. We have some guests today from one of our partners that we've been working with to help our clients solve a problem that has just become a big deal over the course of the last few months, and it's going to be a bigger deal going into next month, and I'll tell you why here in a second. But we're going to be talking about DMARC. Which stands for delivery. No, let's see if I can remember. I forget. I know it has message authentication.
Domain-based message.
Domain-based. That was it.
Yep.
Domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance.
That's not one of the easier ones.
That's why we just call it DMARC, because nobody wants to see that over and over again. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kieran Frost from DMARC. He is their Chief Technology Officer. Did I get that right?
Chief Operations Officer.
Chief Operations Officer. We also have Ed Carroll and Brogan Finemore from DMARC with us as well. And you have to forgive them because I think it's, what time is it in your neck of the woods?
8 p.m.
8 p.m. They're down in South Africa. If you can't, you'll notice really quickly when they start talking. So with that, Kieran, take it away, my friend.
Great. Thank you, Lewis. Really appreciate the time and the opportunity. So thank you, everybody that's joined us. We always enjoy talking about DMARC. As you can imagine, it makes us very fun at parties. And today we're going to be telling you about a very particular problem with email, and a problem that is going to be affecting more and more of us, given some announcements by some of the big players in the email ecosystem. But I'll touch on that towards the end of the presentation today. Firstly, I just want to, thank the Alvarez Technology Group for having us. We're very honored that you've given us this opportunity, and we hope to do you proud. So a big shout out to the team at Alvarez, who have been a great partner for us in the US market. So we're going to talk about DMARC, as we've already mentioned. I'm going to give you a couple reasons why I think it's relevant to organizations of all kinds of shapes and sizes. And hopefully, by highlighting the issues, we're going to, give you a good sense that this is something that's real and something that's absolutely worth fixing. And we're going to give you some actions to take. Hopefully this leads to, us delivering on our mission, which is making the internet a safer place. But there's a pretty short route for us all to walk to get to that ultimate goal. So let's dive into it. I think it'll come as a surprise to precisely nobody on the call today that email is a bit of a fraught platform. As with many parts of the early internet, it was designed, along the design principle of can we build this thing? And, the many people who contributed to email as a platform were obviously very successful, and that's still the most widely used business communication tool. But unfortunately quite fraught. So 91% of cybercrimes, up to 91%. I mean, you'll read statistics all over the place. We've seen as high as 94, but 91% of cybercrimes are initiated with email. And the reason for this is quite simple. It's really easy to send an email pretending to be, just about anyone in the world. In attempting to solve this problem of impersonation, or spoofing, as anybody in cybersecurity will tell you, what often ends up happening is, we're trying to stop the bad guys getting in, and we hit some of the good mail. So we start to see issues of delivery. Our legitimate mail starts landing up in spam buckets, and depending on the contents of that mail, that can be frustrating, annoying. I'm sure we've all had this kind of experience in our lives, but it can also be costly, obviously, depending on the contents of that mail. And underpinning all of this, there's just a general lack of visibility and audit. So what do I mean by that? Well, you as a technology professional in your organization, you might have a pretty good handle on, what we call the everyday email environment, your Office 365s, your Google Workspaces. And you might, do a pretty good job of keeping your eye on that environment, making sure that it's, conforming to best practices. But there's often many other uses of email within an organization. So consider, for example, email marketing, or your monthly bills that go out, or pay slips that go to your staff. All of these will make use of your domain. And often we find within organizations, there's seldom a single person or team that's got a good view of what's going on in all of those platforms. Now, those are the legitimate senders. If you consider somebody nefarious sitting outside of your organization, trying to impersonate your organization, trying to leverage your good brand capital, your relationships with your customers, and trick those customers into paying a fraudulent invoice, well, you're not going to know anything about that email when it gets sent from the attacker to that customer. You're only really going to know about it when the customer turns around and says, but I paid that invoice, or I received this strange email from you guys and it had this dodgy attachment. What's going on? And that's often too late. So I've kind of alluded to this, but there's a number of damages that can extend from impersonation attacks. Deposit fraud is by far the most widely abused, and by deposit fraud, I mean the example where you receive an invoice from a supplier who's being impersonated, but by the way, the banking details have changed. I'm sure we've all seen these types of attacks before. So definitely still the most widely abused vector exploited by attackers, but by no means the only one. In fact, the one that we see growing the fastest is really around identity theft. And this is where, attackers will impersonate someone with authority in the organization, saying something along the lines of, hey, everyone, we're just undergoing our ISO audit. We've had to change our password policy. Please will you click the below link to do so? And the user's trusting, that individual, click the link and unwittingly hand over their username and passwords to the attacker. I think it goes without saying that they can be used, they being impersonation mails, can be used to distribute not only ransomware, but kind of payloads of all varieties. And what's quite interesting is that we've seen big pieces of legislation like GDPR make the layperson more familiar with the value of their data, so too the reputational costs of getting the stuff wrong are only increasing. I think, long gone are the days where issues of cybersecurity don't appear on a risk register at a board level. So definitely something that organizations are taking seriously because people are taking more seriously. So generally speaking, when we have this discussion with customers, they'll say, I absolutely hear you. We know that this is a problem, and that's why we've invested in insert email security platform here. And those platforms are incredibly important. And we're not here to tell you that you can get rid of those platforms. CyberCrime's got all the answers for those particular issues. But I think what's very important to recognize is that those platforms are incredibly limited in terms of scope. So what do I mean by that? Well, if I'm an attacker and I'm sending a mail into your organization, utilizing your brand and your domain, sure, your email security platform has a role to play in determining whether or not that attacker can successfully land an impersonation into your organization. But what happens if the attacker's targeting externally, leveraging that brand that I mentioned earlier? Well, the suppliers, the customers, the rest of the world, they're not going to benefit from your investment over here. And the reason is quite simple. The mail goes from the attacker to the supplier, to the customer, to that target in the rest of the world. And that's really what we're here to talk about, and the hole that we seek to plug. And the way that we do that, by the way, is utilizing the standard called DMARC. And we'll talk about DMARC towards what it actually does towards the end of the presentation. Now, you would have seen on the holding slide this QR code. So I'm going to ask you to take your phone out, scan the QR code. Brogan will, if she's allowed to, I'm not sure if she's got the permissions, but Brogan will pop that link in the chat. And basically what this QR code will link to will be a landing page. This landing page is going to do a couple of things. The first thing that it's going to do is it's going to ask you for 2 email addresses. So the first one will be your business email address. The second one will be an alternate, perhaps your personal email address. And effectively what we're going to do is we're going to try and send you an email from, in this case, test@businessdomain.com to test@businessdomain.com, and also to name@gmail.com. And the reason for this is that we're kind of trying to prove that you can get mails into these kind of 2 broad categories within your organization and within, an external party to your organization. That's the first thing that we're going to do. The second thing that we're going to do, and this will happen as soon as you've plugged those 2 email addresses in, is we're going to serve you a score out of 5. And this score, at its most basic level, is a measure of how easy or difficult it is to impersonate your domain. If you're a 5 out of 5, that's great. That's where we want to be. That's where we want to see organizations. But what we find is that many organizations, score a 3 out of 5 or less. And this score basically tells you there is a problem, that your domain is available to be impersonated. And that's obviously the hole that we'd like to plug for you. Let's talk about what goes wrong when this stuff goes wrong, because I think that that's very important to understand. So, I mean, we've got, some enormous figures that you see over here. I think this is going to come as a surprise to exactly no one, but there is, a rich business to be made in being an impersonator, a fraudster. And, we've got 12 of the biggest attacks over here, but, this is by no means a problem that's limited to the upper echelons of industry. In fact, we've seen very, very personal examples. So this is actually one of the customers that I helped, that I first dealt with, who had lost a significant amount of his personal money. So Ian was the customer of one of our customers now, and basically what happened to Ian was he was having a conversation with his wealth planner about what he was going to do with a significant portion of his life savings. It was $50,000, and he was having this conversation, and at that time he was he'd heard about this Bitcoin thing, and he's talking to his wealth planner. And what had actually happened is, in the interim, attackers had access to his account, and 2, as soon as they started seeing this transaction go through, started hitting his account with copy-pasted emails that the wealth planner had sent. So from Ian's perspective, he suddenly receives 3 of the exact same mail. And Ian does kind of exactly what all of us would do. You just reply to the most recent one. And what he didn't know is that at that point, he was starting to have a conversation not with his wealth planner, but with an attacker. And he ends up paying, the full sum of money into this attacker's Bitcoin wallet, and ends up losing, all of his life savings. So I think this is really important, and I think something that we try and advocate for at DMARC is that, security is not something that you solve with a single solution. So this story that I've just told you, and in fact this methodology plays out, thousands and thousands of times a day, is a story of multiple failures of security and multiple areas where you should be looking to improve the way in which you kind of approach these things. So we'll talk obviously about our area, but there are multiple areas in which we can have this conversation. So these attacks, as I mentioned, have a very familiar look and feel. What we often see is that the attackers will have access to an individual's account. There's a number of ways that this can happen. I'm sure we're all familiar with many of them. For example, you might reuse your password, and this is obviously a failure in security in and of itself, but you might reuse your password across multiple platforms. Let's say one of those platforms get breached. The attackers use those same username and password on your personal email, and eventually they gain access to your account. That's obviously just one vector, but there's multiple. What they'll often do is they'll sit in that account for months at a time, and they'll forward all communication in some way to an account that they control. And they're looking for keywords, they're looking for opportunities. So in the case of Ian, this was, obviously this big transaction that he was about to make. And then what they do is at that point, they impersonate the person that you're trying to pay. And it's at that point that you lose control and you're talking to the attackers. What was very striking for me when I was unpacking this case with Ian was the ability of these attackers to speak the language of their intended of the person they're intending to impersonate. So they speak the language of the wealth planner, the language of the lawyer, the language of the billing person, and so they're very, very astute in that way. So how can we kind of avoid these attacks? And as I mentioned, there's multiple failures in this simple chain here. The first is that there's a couple of things that you can do, a couple of actions you can take just on your side in your environment to try limit and this is obviously not an exhaustive list, but it's very, very kind of common sense approaches that you can take. The first is obviously try, where possible, enable two-factor authentication and monitor for risky logins. Most platforms have some capability for you to accomplish both of those, and if you are on an email platform that doesn't allow for 2FA, get off that email platform because that's a disaster waiting to happen. Monitor for external forwards. This is maybe less intuitive, but if you think about it, there's very few reasons in most businesses that you would want a mail to be coming into your environment only to immediately be, externally routed. And if there is a use case for that, make that the exception, not the rule. So monitor and lock down those external forwards. And in the case of stopping, being the company that's being impersonated, well, the simple answer is enable DMARC. I spoke earlier about how, this is not just something that targets the upper echelons, of industry. What we've seen is a marked increase in the use of or in the targeting of smaller organizations and indeed of individuals, as the story of Ian tells you. So IBM puts out their cost of data breach report on an annual basis, and last year's report showed a nearly 15% increase in terms of costs for organizations smaller than 500 users. So we're seeing this marked increase kind of across verticals and across organization size. Indeed, when you look at the data and you start to unpack it, you see that, of course, you're going to see a concentration of phishing attacks around financial industries, but the rest of these industries bear little resemblance to one another. And in fact, what we're seeing is that there's not really a sweet spot anymore. The ability for attackers to, leverage tooling that makes, I'm very hesitant to use the words generative AI, but that gives you access to tooling that allows you to deliver attacks on a much bigger scale than you previously could have. We only anticipate that these numbers are going to increase over time, and begin to target more industries than ever before. So why don't we hear more about this? Well, there's a couple of very, very simple answers to that question. The first is that, when you get got, you don't like to tell people. I think that's kind of self-evident, getting tricked doesn't feel good, and so you feel shame, and that leads to silence. And I think most dangerously in terms of cybersecurity, it leads to acceptance. And I think for the longest time, there's been acceptance that this problem of impersonation is baked into the fabric of email, and it's just a cost of doing business. You just have to accept that, that these costs are going to be yours to bear, and you have to accept that there is simply no answer because the problem is too big. And that may have been true a while ago, but that picture is quickly shifting. So DMARC is not something that we at ZenMark came up with. I'm sure that's if you've had any exposure to DMARC, it's you'll have already known that fact. It's a project of the IETF, and it functionally does two very powerful things. The first thing that DMARC does is it gives us visibility. So when you publish this DMARC record in the DNS, for the first time, you're able to see who is sending mail utilizing your domain. And very importantly, all of that data is generated by everybody who's receiving mail. So you publish the DMARC record, and suddenly thousands of recipient servers around the world start telling you when they receive mail from your domain. This is really powerful because for the first time, you get to see all of your legitimate infrastructure, and you get to see people that are perhaps using your domain for nefarious means. The second thing that DMARC does is it allows you to, once you've identified who the legitimate senders are, and once you've configured those senders to appear legitimate to the rest of the internet, it allows you to effectively say, and nobody else is allowed to send on my behalf. So it's a whitelisting process. It allows you to tag and authenticate senders that are allowed to send on your behalf and reject absolutely everybody else. A global solution to the problem of impersonation, and one that we're actually seeing as being, more and more critical and more baked into the very fabric of email. So Lewis made mention of the fact that there's been a bit of a shift in the market. And in fact, what's happened is that Google and Yahoo have put out guidance around their expectations if you want to send mail to them. And effectively what they're saying is that if you are sending them 5,000, if you ever send them, this is actually quite an important point. If you ever send them on a single day 5,000 mails, you will be described as a bulk sender. And if you are a bulk sender, you have to have the authentication mechanisms that I mentioned in place. They're known as SPF and DKIM, and we can get into the technical details of what they do a little bit later. But you have to have SPF and DKIM in place, and very importantly, you have to have a DMARC record. Now, people, I think, misunderstand the intent of this. What Google and Yahoo are saying is that they are expecting domain owners to be sending good email. And a great way to do that is to make sure that people cannot abuse your domain. So while, this is a really important thing for Google and Yahoo to do in terms of the product they deliver, as a domain owner, it's a really important thing to do because it allows us to protect, our entire ecosystem against the misuse of your domain. So, by starting in February, starting on February 1st, they started rolling out these requirements, and a small percentage of mails would be getting error messages that you're sending to Google if you're not conforming to the standard. By April, they're going to start rejecting mails that, again, starting with a small percentage, rejecting mails that come from domains that don't pass SPF, DKIM, and DMARC checks. And by, I think it's June, they're going to they will have kind of completed the project, and the expectation is that you must conform to the standard if you want to deliver mail into those environments. Now, in the news that's come out about this, one of the key questions or one of the key reactions has been, well, we don't send 5,000 mails, so we're fine. But they also updated their guidance for absolutely everybody else. And that guidance says that you need to have one of the authentication mechanisms, or namely SPF and DKIM in place, and not DMARC. But the problem is that how do you know that all of your platforms, that marketing platform, that billing platform, that payroll system, how do you know that it's sending DMARC authenticated mail, that it's passing SPF and passing DKIM, unless you've got a DMARC record in place? So it's a softer requirement, but the requirement is implied. Now, I've made mention of SPF and DKIM. I think it's important to understand what they do. At a very, very high level, an SPF record, sender policy framework, is a way for you to prove your identity. It's no more or less complicated than a list of IP addresses where you tell the internet, this is where mail should be coming from. DKIM, Domain Keys Identified Mail, is a technology that protects against manipulation of mail. So it's a way for a receiver to verify that the mail that they've received is the one that was sent, from source. And DMARC says that you have to have one of these two in place in order for a mail to be considered valid. And so this shift in the ecosystem from Google and Yahoo, this shift in requirements is a very, very important one, not only for those of us that are sending out mail to large consumer bases, for example, but it's a large shift in the way that a large shift in expectations that the world has for how we as domain owners approach domain security for our environment. Just kind of in closing here, what's CENMARC's role? I made mention that DMARC is this open standard. What role do we play? And I think it's very important, and we do this, with the support of the team at Alvarez. But we basically provide a platform. So I mentioned that a DMARC record is going to generate thousands of records for you to interpret. Our platform takes all of that XML data, parses it, enriches it, turns it into something that a human being can actually do something with, and then we provide human beings to actually do something with it. So we'll, and I'm using the royal we here, Lewis, I hope that that's okay, but we will help you, get this right, so that we can get ahead of the requirements for Google and Yahoo, but most importantly, get ahead of, or get ahead of, attackers trying to misuse and abuse your domain. So that's it from me. Thank you again for making the time. I mean, we'd absolutely, and Lewis, you can slap me on the wrist if I'm speaking out of turn here, but for those of you that are interested, we'd love to, embark on this journey with you. We'd love to get your domains onto our platform and have a look at that data. Hopefully there's something interesting to show you. And most importantly, solve these problems of, impersonation, security on the one hand, and productivity on the other hand. But yeah, just once again, thank you from the CENMARC team. Really appreciate and thank you for the time.
Well, Kieran, thank you so much. Appreciate all that information. I know it's a lot to take in. Our team is here to help any of you out there who still have questions. I will tell you that one of the questions that I've gotten, by the way, we do have the Q&A button, so feel free to use that if you have any questions. We're happy to answer them. We're going to run a little long today, but that's okay because it's something that's important because of the urgency of the DMARC deadline coming in a little over a month. Thank God we have the 29th. That gives us an extra day before the April 1st shows up. But, the reality is, and this is a question that I've gotten a lot from people who we've talked to is, I don't have 5,000 emails that I send out at once. I'm a small company or I'm a small nonprofit. I maybe have 100 or 300 people on my mailing list. And what we tell them is, well, you're using a third party to send those emails. It may be Constant Contact. It may be Blackbaud, which is big in the nonprofit industry in the United States. It may be, MailChimp. And those third parties who are sending those bulk emails on your behalf don't know how many you're going to send. And if you violate the rule, then it's their email servers that get blacklisted by Google and Yahoo, which means it impacts not only you, but everybody that uses those services. So from their perspective, they don't care that you only send out 100 emails. They want you to have DMARC set up, or they're not going to let you send through their platform. So a lot of folks are getting emails from these sending companies, or they might be using third-party marketing companies like we do. So our marketing company prepares a lot of material, and they send that out on our behalf, but we don't even know what service they use. They can change that service. They can use MailChimp today. Next month, they decide, hey, we got a better deal with Constant Contact, so we're going to switch to them or, somebody else. But at the end of the day, it's going out as, an email from alvareztg.com. So it's incumbent upon us to, verify that those senders are legit. And that's where DMARC comes in, and that's where CENMARC's services come in, because it's not just set it once and forget it. It's a constant, monitoring and, updating of those services, and also seeing, one of the things that I like about the service is you find out who's out there trying to send email pretending to be you. Because those show up as well in the monitoring portal. So really interesting stuff. And thank you so much for coming. Jeff, Anil, any comments?
I had one more thing I wanted to add real quick is that, we're seeing also a lot from cyber insurance companies here in the United States that are making DMARC a requirement, regardless of the size of organization you are. If your carrier, let's just use Travelers as an example, because they're one of the largest cyber insurance underwriters here in the United States, they're now making it a requirement on their list. And if you don't have DMARC, your policy is going to be more expensive, or you may be denied altogether, depending on the industry you're in. And on that topic too, depending what industry you're in, if you're regulated by any government organization or oversight, like I know, for example, the FDIC is making it a requirement for any bank that's going to be insured by the FDIC has to have DMARC, regardless of whether you really need it or not. They're making it a requirement, and so it's best to get ahead of that curve now and get it implemented before they start penalizing organizations for not having it in place.
Yeah, and I would just add as a last thought, even though if you're not sending a large volume of email, the protection of your domain from impersonation, that alone is worth investing in the protection, in my view.
Good point. Well, thank you all for attending today. Those of you out in the audience, if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to us. If you don't have our email address, you can use our generic info@alvareztg.com. And if you need any more information on DMARC, feel free to reach out to us, and we will be happy to answer those questions. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.